We have been in Matthew since last Thanksgiving, and we started with Advent and Christmas and the birth of Jesus, and then in January we went all the way to the end of the book, to Matthew 28, to study the Great Commission because we were talking about missions, and then for Lent and Easter we backed up for a couple of the books and did the Passion Week, the last week of Jesus with his death and his resurrection. And since then, since Easter, we've been in the middle of Matthew. The center of the book is broken up into 5 discourses, or 5 major teachings. And the first one, you remember, was the Sermon on the Mount, and we learned about how to relate to one another, kingdom values. And then now this new series, What Do We Do Now, is the mission discourse from Matthew 10. We take what we learned in the Sermon on the Mount and we send it out into the world. We communicate that. So when we put together a sermon series, of course, truth comes first. And then we look at that and try to figure out how can we not help truth, that sounds silly, but help us apprehend truth to a greater degree. And that's why we do things with the stage. And you guys are so great. The stage looks amazing. You do such a great job. And my response always is, it's a team effort. And in fact, what you see up here is not me. That was Josh and Matt. They put that together. So be sure to thank them for that. And then we also, the graphic on the screen and on the front of your bulletin, What Do We Do Now? And the bumper video, right before the sermon, we call that the bumper video, shows us a picture of fishers this time. For the Sermon on the Mount, it was Monument Circle. The Sermon on the Mount graphic was going into the Monument Circle. And that's intentional too, because when Jesus spoke, he was speaking into his culture. And so this is a reminder that what we learn here is not just so that we can have a nicer life. I hope it is a nicer life. But it's to take truth into the world. And as we go through the sermon series, you're going to see the stage, or through the 5 discourses, you're going to see the stage will have a little bit more light each time we do a new discourse. And that's because Jesus spoke a little bit more light into the world each time he added another discourse. So they're all intentional, all so that we can experience the truth and it'll go down deep. I hope that's working for you. It tends to work for me. So this morning we are in the chapter, Matthew 10, verse 16, the chapter that is called the Mission Discourse. So I'm going to read this. It's a little bit of an extended reading time. So if you want to just listen, close your eyes, and imagine Jesus speaking, that's perfectly fine. Or if you want to read along, that's fine too. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say. For what you are to say will be given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child. And children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end shall be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? So, have no fear of them. For nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. but even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. This is the word of the Lord. So my mom came to visit last spring, and I'd been telling her what's been going on downtown, so she wanted to make sure she could go down for a Thursday. We went down, we had the usual meal, and Pastor Eric spoke. I led worship, we had a time of prayer, and we were cleaning up and getting ready to leave. And if you've ever met my mom, some of you have, she's quite a small woman, 5'2". She actually does have eyes of blue. And she's been ravaged by the effects of rheumatoid arthritis, so stairs are not her friend. In order to get out of the church down there, the service is in the basement. We go up a half flight of stairs up into the alleyway. There are 2 steps, and you step over a threshold onto the landing, and then you go up. And I turned around to her, and I said, do you want me to go before you or after you? And she said, it doesn't matter. I said, okay. So my thought is, I'm going to step over the threshold onto the landing, turn around, and help her up. And I'm just getting onto the landing, and I see Pastor Eric's face just go white, and then he screams out, she fell. And I turn around, and my mom has just fallen backwards down 2 stairs onto the cement. She was not quite with it. She was making some noises, but we got her to come to, sitting her in a chair, got her up to my van, and the first thing she said when she kind of came out of it is, I am not going to the hospital. I said, well, that's not really your choice, is it? But actually it was. How can you take your mom to the hospital if she doesn't want to go? So on the way home, I keep trying to broach the subject gently, like, well, it's on our way. We're just going at 465. It's just right, it's right there. And we drove right by. And then I remembered that one of our doctors had been down there, and she had to leave early. So I said, let's go to Dr. Juanita's house. She lives near me, and then we'll see what she says, if you should go to the hospital or not. And she said, okay, that would be fine with her. And of course, thank you, Dr. Juanita. I think she's here somewhere. She said, yes, go to the hospital. So we go up to St. Vincent's at exit 210, and right away there's testing. We went to the CAT scan and a couple of different x-rays, and she was hurting here and her wrist and of course her head. All kinds of tests, bunches of people in her room, not total chaos, but almost. And then two more people come in and they say, sorry, stop everything. We have a subdural hematoma, which is bleeding on the brain. I can barely say that. Bleeding on the brain. So you are going to the brain trauma unit at St. Vincent's on 82nd Street. So they bring the gurney in within seconds. The gurney is there. They're moving her. I'm running to my van. They're taking off. I'm following them on 465 around 2 in the morning. There's no traffic. I had all 6 lanes to myself. I felt like doing this, but no. I followed the ambulance, and we got to the hospital. And again, they took the readings of the other technicians, and the doctors weren't there, of course. There was just more going on at that bigger hospital, and they didn't get to her until around 6 in the morning. And they put her in a room, and they tell me, there really isn't anything you can do. Why don't you go home to bed? And I was like, that sounds like a good idea to me. I'd been up for at least 24 hours by that time. And you know how when you're in a stressful situation and the adrenaline is kicking and you're tense, we were talking about possible brain surgery. Would she stay with us? How could we get her back home to Michigan? All of that all night long. I got in the car and made it home and went to sleep. But on the way home, just that adrenaline hit bottom. And I am so thankful for our doctors and nurses that are here as part of our body. Even the ones that aren't part of our body, I'm thankful for, because medicine is not my gift. There's a good reason for that. I kind of keel over with the blood thing. But I just don't like it. I don't like hospitals. And you make it very easy to like it, but I don't like them. And I think the reason is because I just feel so out of control. There isn't anything I could do. My little mama in a bed, and there wasn't anything I could do. I just don't like being out of control. Anybody identify at all? Yeah. Jesus knows that that's part of our human nature, and he knew that his disciples, Matthew says that the 12 disciples in verse 1 were around him, and he's commissioning them out of this chapter. In Luke 10, though, it says he was talking to the 70. So probably the 12 were close, and then the 70 were arrayed around. And that's really important, because in a way we could say if he was just talking to the 12, that maybe it was just for them. But because in Luke we hear it's for the extended disciples, we know this is for us too. And I wish this was all going to be muffins, unicorns, and cupcakes, whatever the phrase is, but it is definitely not. But it gets better, so we're going to have to go into it a little deeply first. So the first thing that you notice about this passage is that there's persecution woven throughout many of the verses. At the beginning, in verse 17, beware of men, for they will deliver you into the courts. You'll be flogged, in their synagogues dragged, deliver you unto death, hated by all for my name's sake. The idea is you're going to be persecuted, first of all, maybe not first, but one of the ways of persecution will be the power brokers of the day, the religious leaders and the government. And that's not all. Brother will rise against brother. So there's this family element going on. And then in verse 22, and you will be hated by all. This cultural context that they were in was going to hate them completely. I can kind of identify with that a little bit. I feel like there's a war going on. Do you? Yeah. So they were being persecuted, and there's a whole bunch of ways that they were. They were going to be flogged, hauled into court, given over to death, hated, and maligned in verse 25. They will malign those of his household. That's like slander, so we're talking behind your back. So everything from talking behind your back to death. That's the gamut of persecution. And I think probably, I hope, that at least you've experienced a little bit of that. And it sounds really bad, but we'll get there in a minute. I'm not wishing evil on you. One of my questions as I worked on this section of the passage was, the gospel I know, the Savior I know, is for me. He's a God of love and mercy and grace and forgiveness. And the gospel is about redemption and restoration. Why is all this intense persecution coming against something that is so good? I looked through the commentaries and nobody addressed that. And thankfully, I was also listening to some sermons to prepare for this one, and I fell upon one by Timothy Keller. And the couple of points that I wish we could do the whole sermon, but we don't have time for that. But we do have time for his two ideas. Why intense persecution? The first is because Jesus gives exclusive claims. The exclusive claims of Jesus are extremely offensive. He said that he's God. John 14:9, whoever has seen me has seen the Father, and that salvation is only through him. John 10:9 says, I am the door, not a door. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. And there are tons of other verses. Those are just two. The other reason that the gospel is so offensive is that we are completely and utterly depraved. Other religions don't say that. Look at Romans 3, or just listen. Romans 3:23-24. The end of 23, I'd never noticed this before. It says, for there is no distinction. No distinction among people. There is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Meaning we are all equal before God. So anything you have done, any accomplishment, any money, any birth, the way you were born, the country you were born in, none of that matters. None of our human effort matters at all. And that's extremely offensive, especially in our culture. Nothing you do is important. Now, that's not to say that after we come to Christ, God doesn't have works for us. He does. But the actual salvation moment is totally and completely his, and we have nothing to add to it. And we're just like everybody else. Not a message that people like to hear. Both of these claims, or both of these ideas, exclusive claims of Jesus and the utter depravity of every person, the root that it goes for is pride. Pride is one of those insidious things, so very offensive. So I've experienced a little persecution in my life, but we have somebody from our body who has served in the Middle East that understands it even to an even greater degree. Their friend was killed on his way to work, a Christian killed on his way to work. And they decided to stay because their friends didn't know Jesus yet. And they wanted to make sure they had every opportunity and everything they could do would be to bring them to Christ. But it got to be a powder keg and a really dangerous situation, and they got out under cover of darkness, which is a really cool story. It would make a great movie, but it's true. It's not a story, it's true. They recouped a little bit here, and they are back in the Middle East in another country because they love Jesus, and they know other people need to hear that. Some things that we've heard on, it seems like every week there's another major persecution that we hear about between ISIS and the ACLU. It's the whole gamut, right? All the businesses that are suffering because of their stand for Christ. It's important to know that if we are persecuted and maybe even executed, it is not a sign of God's displeasure or disfavor on us. If we are persecuted or maligned or hated, it's not a sign of God's disfavor. In fact, it might be an indication that you're doing everything right according to God. So what do we do? This is an if situation, or this is not an if situation, it's a when. It's not if we will face persecution. We will face persecution at some point. And Jesus gives right away at the beginning, in verse 16, the end of verse 16, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. This is his first instruction for how we are to handle persecution. Wise as serpents and innocent as doves, a tension that needs to be managed. We need to have knowledge and be strategic. Our friends in the Middle East watched the news and they listened to the embassies and they were understanding what was going on. They were wise, but they were also innocent as doves and sharing the love of Christ, being holy and gracious. It's a tension that has to exist. So that's the first way to bear up under persecution. Since persecution is going to come, Jesus tells us another way to deal with it, and that is we're not to fear. The Greek word fear in this passage is phobeo, and it's where we get the word phobia. So it's this gripping fear. It's not just, oh, I'm a little afraid. It's gripping fear that immobilizes you. And he says we don't have to have that. Verse 19, there are four passages that talk about fear in this section. The first two, do not be anxious about how you're to speak. And I love the way that Lavender's New Testament puts it. It says, do not be unduly concerned. Do not be unduly concerned. Don't let it eat away at you. And then in verse 26, so have no fear of them. And 28, and do not fear those who will kill the body but cannot kill the soul. These are both directed at not fearing the persecutors. And then there's this little switch that happens in verse 28. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. There is a kind of phobeo, a kind of fear that is this reverential awe, that fear that is a good fear, a holy awe that we are to have when we look at God. Not that gripping phobia fear of those who are persecuting. And even that holy awe fear is mostly for those who don't know him yet. Our soul, if we believe in Christ and we've accepted his salvation, our soul is not going to be destroyed in hell. He's not really talking to believers in this passage. He's talking to those who have not yet made a commitment to Christ, to himself, because he's talking. And then the last part, I just love this. 31, fear not, because you are much more valuable than many sparrows. Right before that, he talks about the hairs of our head are numbered. That doesn't mean that he knows how many there are. He knows this one is hair number 428, and this hair is number 7,986, and on and on. I've always had long hair, and it was down to my waist when I was in high school, and my mom would be vacuuming, and it would start to smoke, and then she'd say, "Would you take care of your hair?" And then, you get the scissors. I was the one who did it. Take the vacuum apart, with the scissors, clean my hair off. I was the only one with long hair, so it was mine. But I always brush my hair and take the hair off when I'm done. But I don't know the hairs that fall off. There's probably a few up here for Fabiola to get when she cleans this week. But God does. He not only has each hair numbered, he knows, that's a metaphor for he knows what's down inside of each of us. We are fully known by him. Fully known. And he says, and you are more valuable than sparrows, and we are greatly loved. We are fully known and greatly loved. And that's the kind of relationship that casts out that phobeo, fear of the persecutors. I love that. We have received God's gift of salvation by faith. We don't have to fear him. We can be at peace. Warren Wiersbe says it like this: the person who fears God alone need never fear any man or group of men. The fear of God is the fear that cancels fear. Think about that for a while and your brain will get caught in circles and warped. But it's true. The fear of God is the fear that cancels fear. This is total and complete freedom that people celebrating the 4th of July don't even have an idea about. Total and complete freedom to be fully known and greatly loved. And that's wonderful, and that would be enough. But there's more. Because of the freedom we have, we must speak the gospel. We have to say it. I love the quote St. Francis says, "Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words." You've heard that before, but it's not in the Bible. He was reacting to an intellectual culture that said, retreat and go into the monastic life. And St. Francis said, no, we need to go out and do good works. And it's a kind of a both and, right? But we can't do good works without speaking. Jesus says, what I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. There are two kinds of speech, or two aspects to speaking in here. Starting at verse 18, you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. The Lord is going to speak through us. And these are the situations where you don't have time to prepare. You are caught off guard, and the Lord just speaks through you. It's a wonderful promise. So we don't have to fear. We don't have to be unduly concerned about those times when we don't have time to prepare. But then there's, in verse 27, look at what this says. Verse 27, what I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. There is responsibility. We do have responsibility to speak. Jesus was not wanting to draw undue attention to his ministry before it was time for him to be crucified. And so he would tell, you know when he did his miracles, it often says, okay, I'm going to heal you, just don't go tell anybody. That's why. He didn't want to draw this undue attention that would distract him from his mission of going to the cross. And so this is another indication. He's telling his disciples things in the dark or hidden, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. But there will come a time after his crucifixion when this is going to take place, when you need to speak. The disciples knew what they were going to say because they lived with him and they ate with him and they slept with him and they made food with him and they did ministry together and they saw people healed and they prayed with him. They were with him 24/7. They were getting ministered to, taught by the master so they would know what to say. So we don't have Jesus here physically in a body. So how do we do that? This passage is for us too. How do we be with Jesus 24/7, learn who he is in order that we can proclaim that to the world? And you're ahead of me. I know you're smart people. It's through his word, reading his word, praying, reading in the morning, taking that thought with you throughout the day, taking time to return to that. And as we kind of move toward the end here, I'm going to go back to the beginning. I saved this beginning for the last on purpose. Verse 16 says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves." Behold, pay attention. I know it's, okay, nobody's sleeping, I don't think. But since we're here, I'm going to say, behold, and pay attention. I know it's a long sermon, but that's okay. It's good stuff. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep amidst wolves. The good shepherd who would lay down and who will lay down his life for the sheep is sending his disciples out among wolves. What is up with that? Why would a good shepherd take his kind and not very smart and loyal and don't do anything on their own and don't know how to feed themselves? Why would he send those sheep out among wolves who are fierce and tricky and work in a pack and want to devour and use their appetites? Why would the good shepherd? Why? It's because Jesus knows that when we've been with him, we know his voice, and he knows that we will listen to it. And he knows that when we're at the end of ourselves, we have nowhere else to go. We have to go to him. It's not an easy lesson. It's not a rainicorn muffins and you, whatever. It's not that fluffy stuff, but this is so good and so important. When we get to the end of ourselves, we know that he is enough. Would we get to the end of ourselves quicker so that he could move to a greater degree? So he sends out his sheep. It is not loving for God to allow us to live in the delusion that we are in control. We have never been in control, and we never will be. When we're in persecution, when stuff doesn't make sense, we don't have control of that situation. And that reinforces the rest of our lives. We don't have control either. He sends out his sheep. We listen for his voice because human effort can't change the world. Only the power of God can transform a soul. Nothing I say here this morning is going to work in your lives at all. We can all go home now. But if the Spirit of God is working through his word, that's what changes a heart. That's what changes a soul. So you might want to stick around a little bit. I'm convinced that the Lord is here and he is speaking to us. When we are completely God-dependent and we give up on our own efforts, God's power is free to work, and his power is way better than any of my efforts. I think there's this struggle in Western society that as we've gone on mission trips, I don't see it in other cultures as much. We have a self-sufficient culture. And I think that is the greatest block to us really understanding how deeply we need Christ. Other cultures depend on him for their very bread and water. And we don't even think twice about grabbing a thing of water. It's just there. So persecution is one of the tools that he uses. He doesn't cause it, but it's a tool that he uses to remind us that we are totally and completely dependent on him. And what is important? Eternal things that are important. When we trust in ourselves, what does that produce? Envy, jealousy, anxiety, harshness, control freaks, pride. Not grace, hope, mercy, love. He is what we need, not our own self-effort. So as we wrap up a little bit here and Kristen comes up, there are two things that will enable us to make this our own and in our own lives. That word endures. Verse 22, you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. The Greek word endures is a combination of abiding under. So yes, we would abide or exist under the persecution, but the word abide is also the word in John 15 that Jesus uses when he says, abide in me. The endurance that Jesus is asking them to have is abiding under God's will, because he won't let any persecution come to us that he can't use for good. In fact, Jesus, I love that passage that Josh read from Philippians 2. Jesus, who existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but he took on the form of a servant. He endured to death. We have him as our example. He endured under God's will. Last week, remember Dr. Buckingham? He said that Jesus in the garden went a little further, and then he prayed, fell on his face, and he prayed, not my will, but your will be done. That is our example, emptying out ourselves completely so that God's will can be done on earth. So I have two questions for you today. Have you received that free gift of salvation? Are you interested in it? I know it sounds weird, and it sounds weird to me too, to share a message about persecution and then say, hey, come on and join us. But it's the best place, the very best place to be is in the middle of God's will. It is grace and hope and mercy, and it's hard, but life is hard without him too. I don't know how people do it without Christ. I really don't. So have you accepted the free gift of God's salvation? And 24/7, how are you getting to know God? Like I said, we don't have him, we don't have Jesus here that we can learn from him right now. The answer is his word. And in your Bible, my Bible's right here, in your bulletin, there's a folder that looks like this. So go ahead and grab it. 50 Days to Summer Reading. There is a passage to read and then 2 lines to fill out how God is speaking to you. And I'm going to make a steak dinner guarantee that if you do this and you are not changed, I will take you out for a steak dinner, because I know that if you read 50 passages and you write down how God is speaking to you, that he will change your insides change you inside to be more like his son, Jesus. I guarantee that will happen. And if it doesn't, I will buy you a steak dinner. So check with me at the end of the summer. I would love to hear stories of how God has worked. I know some of you are already involved in a reading plan. Great. This is for those of us who don't have a reading plan already. So as I pray, or before I pray, I want to read something that I found last night. Wasn't looking for anything to add to the sermon. It just kind of came through my news feed, and I tried to track down the source, and it's mixed whether it was John Paul II or a priest who left the priesthood under really bad circumstances. And if it was the priest, I think it's even more profound. So listen to this. Freedom is not being able to do whatever you want to do. That is license. If you have license rather than authentic freedom, your house is built on sand and will collapse. Authentic freedom is the power to do what we ought to do. Authentic freedom is the power to do what we ought to do. The power to choose the good and the true and the beautiful. That will vanquish fear every time. If your concept of freedom is really license, fear will come out on top every time. Freedom must be united with truth. There is no freedom outside the truth. If you are truly disciples, you will abide in my word. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Those are the words of Jesus that closes that. So I'd like you to grab a blue card. We do use these. We say it every week, and we're just going to keep saying it so you know that we pray for you every week, every card. We take them very seriously. And as you're looking at that, I'm going to pray in a minute, and if you would like to receive Christ, on the back there are little checkoff boxes. If you are interested in reading more this summer, taking on that role of disciple 24/7 and hearing from the Lord, then just write Bible on there, and we'll be praying for you as you do that. If you're following another reading program and you want to write Bible there, that's great too. A friend on Facebook put it this way. We were corresponding back and forth. What gets me is how close Jesus is whenever I reach the end of myself, flooding into my body, my mind, my emotions, and my spirit with his own spirit. Highly amazing.